I'd like to now introduce our speakers for today's presentation. Colin Dunn, CEO, Fend Incorporated. Bill Fitzpatrick, founder and CEO of Loop One. And Phillip Everett, sales engineer, Loop One. With that, I'd like to turn it over to our presenters. You can take it away from here.
All right, well, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Megan. I'll take a moment here just to briefly introduce myself and the team here at Loop One. As was mentioned, I am the founder and CEO of Loop One. We have been a SolarWinds partner for a little over 15 years now in North America. We have a little over 100 employees around the world supporting our clients around the world as well. We also have a close relationship with a sister company, Axiom Technical Solutions, which is where we hold our facilities clearance as well as our DoD clearances. I carry a clearance myself. And so this topic is one that's near and dear to my heart. I've worked in air-gapped networks various times throughout my career. I know Phillip has as well. And of course, Colin has a deep background in supporting DoD agencies and federal agencies. What I really like about this topic, as I get ready to hand it back to Colin here, is I feel like we're helping to raise awareness around what's possible for audit and compliance within our most secure environments, those air-gapped environments where historically it's been really difficult to get access in convenient ways to bring information back out of those networks to help streamline that audit and reporting need that we have for all of our environments. So really excited for the content we have today. Looking forward to the data that Colin's going to share and the demo that we're going to provide at the end of this for how we can leverage the Fend solution with SolarWinds SEM product. So thanks very much, Colin. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Bill, and thanks, Megan. Just a little bit about Fend. We're here to protect critical infrastructure, whether it's energy infrastructure, manufacturing, defense industrial base, but also air-gapped networks on the IT side. And what we bring is the ability to get data out of one system and into another with no physical way for somebody to hack into that system through the network connection. We're headquartered in Arlington, Virginia, and we're very proud to design and manufacture our products here in the US. But we'll dig right into the content here and start talking about some of the challenges of complying with these new federal cybersecurity mandates. And we know that some folks on the line here today may not be with a federal agency, but you're interested in understanding more about how you can reduce risk, how you can block cyber attacks, and get that visibility you need to make sure that there's not something lurking on your network that shouldn't be there. And that's really the reason why these different mandates exist and have come out over the last couple of years, then that have not deadlines that extend into the far future, but things that are due this fiscal year in terms of reporting and compliance. It's all about understanding what's happening on our networks, whether it's IT or OT, seeing is there a threat there that might have been there for months, if not years, because we have some pretty patient adversaries that might be waiting, gathering information, exfiltrating that data, or just being put in place to launch an attack later. Understanding what's there is so important. And some of these lurking threats are not easily noticed without continuous monitoring. And so there's several different operational directives and memorandums that have come out over the last few years, including Department of Homeland Security's Binding Operational Directive 2301, the Office of Management and Budget, M2404, DoD Manual 8530.01, and others that really have that theme of we need to understand what's going on in these networks, whether they're connected to the outside world or air-gapped, so that we can find those threats before any harm can be done. Well, let's dig into one of these and talk about what is being asked of federal agencies and what are some of the techniques and technologies that can be applied if you're outside of the federal community to help reduce the risk of attack and make sure that you're compliant with your reporting requirements. So the DHS BOD 2301 has the theme of improving asset visibility and vulnerability detection on federal networks. And again, that goal is understanding what is happening, not waiting for there to be a problem, not waiting for an attacker to make a mistake or to be otherwise discovered, but continuously looking for those threats. And the requirements within the BOD include asset discovery. You've got to do it every week. You've also got to do vulnerability enumeration every 14 days. And some of these are big, complex networks where that might take you longer than a couple of weeks to get through. But the language within says you've got to start it every 14 days. So effectively, whether you're big or small, you're looking at a solution that really wants to lean toward continuous monitoring, not just because you want to make sure that there aren't any gaps in your visibility, but also to take one more thing away that might have to be manually implemented by your already very busy security operations team. So you've got to make sure that you're continually looking for those assets, doing the vulnerability enumeration, and then it applies to just about everything. We're talking about all IPv4 and IPv6 addressable assets. So it might have been installed yesterday or 20 years ago. It's within scope. If you can talk to it, it's something you have to do these scans on. And you're not off the hook if you have an air gap. And when we talk about air gaps, we're talking about networks that are physically disconnected from other networks. And you might have to do this due to regulation, if you're in a space like nuclear energy, for example, or you're in the intelligence community, or it might be that you just want to reduce risk and complexity and you're disconnecting these networks. There are opportunities for threats to make it into these networks over time, whether through a malicious actor, an insider that may have brought something in via sneaker net, or accidentally. If we're talking about operational technology in particular, some technician might have come in to service your chiller that happens to be on your data center and introduce that threat accidentally. These are the sorts of things that are really useful to detect with that continuous monitoring, because they might not otherwise exhibit themselves in normal ways. And related to that, within scope is not just IT, but OT as well. And for so long, these requirements have really been just for IT and have been silent on OT, but specifically covered this time around are those industrial control systems, those networks that are really complex and in particular have a very long life. And you could be talking about incredibly old, out-of-date technology mixed with new. They're all within the scope here, including, as I mentioned, air-gapped and otherwise. And it applies to all federal civilian branch agencies. And if you're not sure whether you're a part of that list, if you're on the federal side, you probably are. It's many dozens of agencies. And even if you aren't on this list, you're probably covered by one of these others, whether it's from OMB or DOD. Also, I put on this slide here as well, the FERC Critical Infrastructure Protection Reliability Standards. If you're joining from TVA or BPA or other agencies that are producing power, or from the energy industry that is regulated by these, the need to do internal network security monitoring, find those threats, and share those results with other stakeholders so that we can stop something that could be widespread more quickly. But generally, without digging more deeply into the other ones here, same themes: continuous monitoring, understand what's on your networks, air-gapped or not, IT or OT, know what's happening. And you're able to do that with a combination of technologies that we'll talk about in a moment, that not just makes it easy to comply, but helps keep you safer as well. So what do you need to do if you're impacted by these? Well, we talked about that need for comprehensive asset inventory. Know what's on your network. There's so often the case, like in OT in particular, where you might have a new chiller or a new controller that's shipped, standard issue now, shipped with a modem, might be for service, might be for the best of intentions to help the manufacturer understand what's happening with that equipment, but you need to know if it's there. You need to disable it, sometimes physically remove it, know what's on your network, and continuously monitor for threats. And you've also got to do your other cyber hygiene. You've got to have strong encryption, make sure that people who need access to networks have it and everybody else does not. And if you're dealing with air gaps, you might be in a situation where these systems are so important or they're so complex that you really cannot trust anybody from the outside to connect back in. Again, that's where the air gaps and data diodes come in. You want to make sure you're continuously doing risk assessments and developing your resilience plans. Practice these and make sure you've got your data backed up. You're going to need those backups. And finally, make sure that your team is continuously trained, that your policies are up to date. The threat landscape continues to change. Make sure that your policies keep up. And very important to remember, these things are in effect now. You've got requirements due this year. We've only got about 60 days left of the federal calendar here. So now is the time to get started if you haven't. And so what we'll do next is we'll dig into this powerful combination of data diodes and continuous monitoring. But first, there's a poll if you want to get continuing education credits. There's a question up on the screen here for the next 30 seconds or so. Make sure that you're taking a look at that and choosing your answer.
While everybody's doing that, I just want to add to what you're sharing there, Colin. I think one of the takeaways for our team here at Loop One is a greater awareness that some of the past attitudes and behaviors, especially around air gap networks, are no longer good enough, no longer going to be accepted. So where I've worked in oil and gas or DoD, and I've had clients that say, well, we don't really worry about vulnerability in that network, or we don't really worry about threat detection in that network. That attitude is really no longer tolerated, right? We have to have certainty, we have to have that awareness, and we have to have ongoing protection because of insider threats and because of just the greater likelihood that we've seen through all of the various breaches and attacks and outages that we've all experienced, that, you know, that attitude that says, well, because it's air gapped, I don't really have to have the same threshold or same standard of diligence. I think we're seeing that attitude, we're moving away from that attitude, and we're moving one that's more proactive and more aware.
Well, absolutely. And especially as you talk about these connected systems on OT, there's so much pressure to bring these systems into the cloud and connect, sometimes to relieve pressure on manpower. But we see threats that are far more diverse than, you know, Windows and Linux. You've got threats identified related to Modbus. I mean, this is the sort of thing we're making sure we keep on those OT networks in particular. But really, an air gap is not good enough. You've got to make sure that you do more. And that's where this combination of continuous monitoring and data diodes comes in, because you can get that X-ray view of what's happening in that air gap network using data diodes and using this continuous monitoring technology, SolarWinds SEM, that Bill will talk about in a moment here. But if data diodes is a category of technology that's new to you, we'll go through it for just a couple of minutes. But fundamentally, we're talking about hardware that gets information into the hands of users while physically blocking cyber attacks. And it's that physics that makes it unique from software, for example, or firewalls that are based on rules and permissions and other things that you've got to keep up to date. There's really just one rule. Data goes in only one direction, and it's enforced with physics. And we're not talking quantum physics. We're talking typically beams of light across an air gap. And it can be a very small gap, but enough to keep an attacker from physically being able to reach those networks. And if you've got one that's got full electrical and optical isolation, that means that you're not even going to be able to do side channel attacks. We're talking about physically separating one system from another. And these can be all encased in some pretty small devices here, fairly compact. You can put them in an equipment cabinet. And it's a class of technology that's gotten a lot of attention over the last few years, in part because of the need and the continued attacks on OT, but also just advances in the ease of use and price points that make it a really practical alternative to some other technologies today. And it's the sort of thing where even over the last year, we've seen major updates to guidance documents like NIST 800-82 or the DoD Unified Facility Criteria on facility-related control system cybersecurity. These came out within the last 12 months, as well as other great guidance documents here that you'll be able to refer back to. But as we dig into the technology, you know, data diodes have been around for some time. Typically, they've been in the intelligence community, you know, pulling data into a SCIF, for example, or monitoring a nuclear reactor. But, you know, what we at Fend have been able to do is to bring this technology down to a price point, ease of use, and ruggedness that you can put data diodes on remote networks, on industrial systems, on a wide variety of IT environments in an easy to use compact design that has been through testing by the Army and Navy, through the DoD Environmental Security Technology Certification Program. It has lots of great connectivity options depending on your needs. But again, we're proud to make this here in the US and serve customers all around the world. And those customers come from a variety of different sectors. We're in most of the sectors of critical infrastructure, from oil and gas to water. We're also in transportation, manufacturing, and federal and other government settings who have a really diverse set of needs, but the use cases have a few things in common. They've got systems where they can't afford to live in the dark. They need the information from one system to get in the hands of others, and they can't afford to get hacked. So we provide that level of physical segmentation from one to the other. Sometimes it's separating the IT from the OT environments, or using the data to detect insider threats, or to populate digital twins in a way where you're making sure there's no physical way back into that network. And it's also a great way to share information with external stakeholders, whether it's threat intelligence or machine telemetry, the folks that might need that to do their job better. Give them the information, but you do not get them any access into that network. So just a couple of quick use cases, and then we'll hand it back over to Bill and the Loop One team. You can use this technology for industrial monitoring. You might have facilities all around the world. You might have buildings on a military installation. You can understand what's happening and what equipment might be about to fail in real time, getting that data out of these systems, which are often or should be air-gapped, making sure that threats don't spread from one building to the next, for example. Using our data diode technology, get that data out, sending it in a one-way fashion. You get the visibility, you get the data, but you don't get the access back into those systems. And it's not just streams of telemetry. You can also send files, whether this is Excel files, CSVs, pulling performance data out of a boiler plant, or might be pulling log files out of a network so that you can understand what's going on with that air-gapped network. One-way file transfer is another great use of the technology. And before we hand it over to Bill and for a demo, it's that opportunity to understand what's happening on those air-gapped networks, which is so key from a cybersecurity perspective and helpful on the compliance issue here, that we want to dig into that use case in more depth. But before we do, we have a second continuing education question here. If you want to spend the next few seconds here answering that, make sure you get your credit for attendance.
While folks are answering that question, I'll jump in here one more time. What's exciting for me, Colin, and why I think Loop One is really happy to be partnering with Fend is just what you touched on there. One, it's the awareness that most of the folks I talk to aren't familiar with data diodes. And as they begin to learn about them, it becomes really intriguing for them how they can deploy them in their network, which then leads to the can I afford this question? And that's the other thing we're really excited to be working with Fend is the solution you created is, in the scheme of the budgets that we work with, really quite affordable. And so I'm excited that it's not just something that makes people more productive and makes their jobs easier, but it doesn't break the budget to do it.
Well, thanks, Bill. And certainly, that you have data diodes from a variety of producers at different price points. But our goal is really to make sure that these are designed and built such that you could put one on every building in a military installation, or every substation across energy infrastructure, making it cost competitive with industrial firewalls, but more secure, and being able to make sure that even if you don't have the ability or the manpower to go patch a firewall, you can put in a data diode there and know that you're going to be continuously protected. So it is a great opportunity for those that are looking for data diodes. Make sure you give us a call if you're looking for different quotes, for example. Love to talk to you. But with that, I want to hand it over to Bill, and then we'll go into a demo in a couple slides here.
Thanks very much, Colin. So I don't have a lot to add to the context of what Colin has described there, but I do want to talk about how we can think about, now that there's a data diode in place, now that we have this methodology to bring information from a secure environment to our administrators, to our stakeholders, in a way that does not compromise security, in a way that does not break the budget, we can really begin to think about what are we doing in that monitored environment to understand what that environment looks like. And I've seen just about everything under the sun. I've seen a lot of very advanced remote keyboard, video, mouse, right? KVM solutions. I've seen SneakerNet. I've seen stuff get burned to CDs. Every now and then I'll see somebody using USB key technology, right, to bring data in and out of the environment. And all of it is incredibly manual. It oftentimes gets overlooked or postponed due to a lack of time and a lack of staff. And so as we start to look at how we can bring intelligent tools into the monitored environment and then make that information readily available on an automated basis to our administrators and our stakeholders, we can support the standards and best practices and workflows that you have in place today while making them more efficient. And so the one way we're going to talk about this morning, how we do that with SolarWinds solutions, we're highlighting SolarWinds Security Event Manager. And as Phillip will describe here in a couple of minutes, kind of the details of what SCM can do. I want to highlight also that SCM is actually a part of a larger suite of solutions from SolarWinds that we call hybrid cloud observability. And so while SCM is our focal point, what we're really talking about is a very affordable, easy to deploy solution that can do not just the security monitoring, but can also do inventory, can also do configuration management, can also do some application monitoring, can do some virtualization monitoring. There's a series of things that the broader SolarWinds platform, as part of the hybrid cloud observability solution, can allow you to do, while also giving you that vulnerability awareness that is specific to SCM. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. So with SCM, a couple of highlights here. We're talking about built-in support for the environments that you care about. So a big one for many of you would be either your DoD or your standards are based on DoD standards. So we'll see that we have extensive support for STIGs, built in, easy to use, and ready to go so that you can be online quickly with the compliance characteristics that matter most to you. In addition, we have a really key feature within SCM that is what's called File Integrity Monitoring, or FIM for short. And this is the ability to monitor files on your secure environment operating systems for changes, and depending on the way your environment is deployed, to know who's making those changes, when they've made those changes, and take action if those changes are detected. And so I won't go through all of those details there. I do want to get it over to Phillip here in a moment to move into the demo. We've got one more slide, and then we'll go ahead and hand it over to Phillip. So kind of just recapping here as we move towards the demo, right? As we talked about at the top of the session, we no longer live in a world where it's okay to say, well, we air gapped it and that's good enough, right? That legacy mindset of nobody can reach it, so it must be safe, just isn't true anymore. I've witnessed on many occasions the pressure that our administrators, members of your teams, are under to make those environments more accessible. I've seen organizations implement hosts that are used to jump points from one environment to the other, which are inherently flawed. I've seen organizations go ahead and implement firewalls where they never said or never believed they would ever have a firewall because of the risk that it can introduce. And it's undeniable that that need for visibility, that pressure to make these high secure environments more accessible for the sake of audit and awareness and compliance and remediation, it isn't getting any easier. And at the same time, those other solutions, using jump points, implementing firewalls where you've never had them before, they, in my opinion, create too great a risk. It's a trade-off that's just not worth it. And I'm really glad that we can be sharing with all of you today this option, this alternative that many folks don't know about, that can give you that outbound data combined with your tools in your secure environment to get that visibility that you need, to defend against insider threats, to not have to make that trade-off in security, and to improve the relative near-term data that you're able to get from your environment without having to discover only too late that something nefarious has been going on. All right, and so with that, we're a little ahead of schedule. I think, Phillip, you've got plenty of time to take your time and show a little bit of HCO, show a little bit of SCM before we get to our Q&A. So I'll turn it over to you, Phillip, for the demo. And I'm looking at our participants list, and I'm noticing that Phillip has just disappeared. So we'll give him a moment here to hopefully get reconnected.
And Megan, while he does, I think there was a third question for continuing education. Does it make sense to pull that up, or perhaps any questions that have come in through the chat?
Absolutely. Let's see. We'll go ahead and get started with the third CPE question that is now on your screen.
All right, looks like Phillip is back. Welcome back, Phillip. I think we've got the stage set here. If you're ready, you can go ahead and proceed with your demo. And I'm not hearing your audio right now, Phillip. You want to check your mic.
How about now?
There you are. Welcome back. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, I lost power there for just a second and it dropped me off with a VPN and everything. So I'm getting reconnected right now. I will have our demo going in just a second.
No worries. Thank you. So while we give Phillip a moment to do that, I'll go ahead and talk a little bit about more kind of what he's going to show this morning. So as I mentioned, our core focus is going to be on the SolarWinds Security Event Manager solution. That solution has the ability to consume log data from a variety of different sources, pretty much anything that you'll find in your high secure environments. It also has the ability to deploy agents to those endpoints. And which is why the SCM appliance or the SCM solution would live inside that secure environment, right? It's not outside the data diode, it's in the environment with the endpoints. And in that, it's able to do all of the various things that SCM can do with regard to collecting information from those endpoints, either by the agent or through log forwarding. So syslog, for example, just a very standard method of data ingestion for SCM. Beyond that, we'll talk a little bit about the SolarWinds hybrid cloud observability environment and the visibility and functionality that can bring as well. Looks like you're ready to go, Phillip. I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Bill. So what we're looking at here is one of the dashboards for the Security Event Manager. And as Bill was saying, this is a tool that's basically, it basically aggregates events from your environment, whether those are Windows events, syslog events, whatever they may be, and it normalizes them. It also has the ability to analyze those events for patterns of behavior. It can track for things such as USB devices being connected to an environment that aren't supposed to be there. The file integrity monitoring is another major function of this tool, where you can track whether someone is accessing files are not supposed to. You can track the access history of files, the editing history of files. And what we're looking at right here is the nodes page for SIEM. And basically, this is a list of devices that are currently monitored. If you see them listed as an agent right here with a checkbox, that means this is a device that we have deployed agents to. If that is not there, that means that the end device has been configured to export logs to the Security Event Manager on its own. So it's just exporting those like you would to a log server You'll also see some of these devices have USB with a check mark and Fend with a check mark, meaning that we are defending these against unauthorized USB connections, and we are tracking file integrity on these devices. Now, once you have those devices connected and you've chosen to what level you want to protect these devices, you also have the ability to apply rules to them. And rules are basically things that it's going to start looking for. It's going to start looking through events. And these rules can be as simple or as complex as you want. They could be as simple as looking for user logon events after expected hours, or they could be very complex, such as checking for specific patterns of logins or access to things that someone shouldn't normally have access to. If it's integrated with an Active Directory instance, it can check what privileges users have and let you know if they're attempting to elevate their privileges, things like that. You'll see these events have these these rules have these tags next to them. And basically, tags are just a way for you to identify what rules are, what compliance policies these rules are there to reinforce. Right out of the box, it has several compliance rules that are going to apply to STIGs, like Bill had mentioned earlier. So if we check DISA STIG right here, it pulls up several rules that specifically apply to STIGs. So checking for worm behavior, user account lockouts, unauthorized USB devices, directory service group logons, USB Defender service failing on devices that have to comply with STIGs, user account lockouts, anything like that. And you can build additional rules and of course apply those tags to those as well. Rules can either be created from scratch, or you can use any of the existing rules as sort of rule templates. So if you would like to go in and get more in-depth off of an existing rule, you can create a rule based on it. And each rule, in addition to what it's searching for, can also take actions based on those, depending what level of access you give this tool. Those actions can range from simply sending a message, either via email or a pop-up message to someone within this network. For example, if someone connects a USB that they're not supposed to, it could feasibly send a pop-up message to their user PC telling them they have violated a policy and they need to come talk to the security department. Or it could, if it's integrated with Active Directory, even go and take actions against someone's account. So if it saw a pattern of access of someone attempting to access things they're not supposed to, or repeated logons faster than a human should be able to do that, indicating you might have some sort of an automated system attempting to brute force a login, it could actually go and disable those accounts and then send a notification, or just create an event letting you know that that has been done. And any events that are collected or that are generated by a rule will be visible in two locations. As they happen, you'll be able to find them in live events, which will be a running cascade of events that are happening in the environment. And you'll also have historical events and reports. And this is going to be one of the more powerful tools here, because in addition to being able to come in and take a look at events that have happened over time, you can see where there's large numbers of events. In here, you can apply queries to look for specific events. But you can also take those queries looking for events or patterns of events, and you can use those to create reports, which can be exported either on demand or on a regular schedule. And those can be exported as either a PDF or as a CSV file. And here you can see we can generate a report. It's going to ask you to apply a query, which you can actually generate here on this page. It's going to ask you for the format. And if you want to group those that report by any specific field in the event. And if you ask to save and schedule a query as a report, not what I was going to do. Oh, I need to come over here. Let's come grab one of our queries. There's what I'm looking for. So if you come over here and schedule a report from a query that you've built, you can set your execution time, how frequently you would like it to execute this. And you can actually add multiple times here. So if you wanted to, for example, run this report and have it sent out to your team every day or even every hour, you could add those times in and have it execute daily. The range of occurrence right here is saying when you want it to start. And if you only want to run it for a set period of time, then you can add an ending on date. You can, of course, add your different formats here. And then you have your sharing options. So if someone's operating within that air-gapped network, then of course you could email it to them if they've got secure email within that. But otherwise, another option here would be something like SFTP. So you could actually set SFTP up in that environment, and you could configure your reports to utilize that SFTP server and fire those reports off out to the data diode, which could then be and those reports could then be transported across the data diode out to your non-air-gapped network for your end users to access.
And I want to pause you there, Phillip, and really take a moment for everybody on the call to understand what we're demonstrating here. So we have talked at length about the data diode and its ability to bring information from a secure environment to the administrators, to the stakeholders across that diode. But I'm sure some of you are thinking, well, how exactly do we do that? How much administrative overhead? How difficult is it to set this all up? You know, what exactly does this entail? And what I want to highlight here that Phillip is showing is that it's incredibly simple. There's no there's no extraneous utilities. There's no Windows scheduled tasks. There's no other little SFTP system having to be running somewhere. It's literally directly from the SEM interface, leveraging the SFTP capability with the scheduling capability that you see here, direct to the data diode in that PDF or CSV format via SFTP. And then from there, the diode will transfer it across and you can pick it up on the other side. So it's an incredibly simple mechanism that doesn't require a lot of sort of effort to script or automate or push things around in the background. It's literally built into the interface. Thanks, Phillip. I'll let you continue.
No, thank you, Bill. And so within this platform, you've basically got all your events that have been normalized. And by normalization, what we really mean here is it takes events from different sources. They may use different terminology. The events may even have completely different formats their data is transferred in. They all get broken down into this standard format right here. So every event will have these different fields. And SEM uses what it refers to as connectors, which are basically translators. They basically they're basically little plugins that SIM uses to teach it how to read events from different vendors. And it uses those connectors to analyze the events and then break them out into these standard formats. So any rules you build will be able to apply to all of your vendors. You won't have to build a rule for Cisco and a rule for Windows and a rule for Linux and a rule for HP switches. Any rule that you build that is looking for any kind of pattern of behavior will be able to apply across all of your devices and all your vendors that are covered by SEM. And that applies the same to your live events. So if you wanted to come in and build rules to track things in real time, that same functionality is available here. And the sort of end result, if you would like to come in and look at the dashboard itself and just get an overall view of the environment as a whole, you do have a dashboard which will show you things like your events, your overall events by type, events over the last hour. You can set up widgets to look for specific events and track those. So logons by user, logon failures by user, logon failures by source machine. And this can help you identify any major troublemakers in the environment at a glance. And that is the Security Event Manager in a nutshell.
Thank you, Phillip. That's terrific. We'll move on. We'll move into Q&A here in just a moment. But before we do that, we've got a couple of minutes. So Phillip, if you can, if you've got access to one of our HCO environments, why don't we go ahead and take a couple of minutes here to show how HCO can combine with SCM to allow for kind of your standard monitoring, right? That inventory, that SNMP polling, that WMI polling. Do you have a HCO environment? I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but an HCO environment that we could take a peek at and share with folks here briefly?
Absolutely. Give me 1 second and I will hop over there and share that.
Right. Some of you that might be more familiar with SolarWinds might recognize the name NPM, or Network Performance Monitor. It's by far the most commonly deployed monitoring solution that SolarWinds sells. It's really kind of their core that the business was built on, going back to 2005, 2006 even, but that has evolved. And today, NPM is a core part of the HCO suite. And the HCO suite comes in two flavors. It comes in an essentials tier and an advanced tier. And it goes well beyond just SNMP and WMI monitoring. And I'll let Phillip tell you a little bit more about it.
Excellent. Thanks, Bill. So what we're looking at right here is the demonstration environment that we have for our clients for the hybrid cloud observability platform. The first thing I would like to point out about hybrid cloud observability is the name itself can be a little bit deceptive. Though cloud is in the name, it is not required. It is perfectly capable of being an entirely on-prem platform, though it does not have to be an entirely on-prem platform. So with HCO, as Bill was mentioning, you may be familiar with NPM. You may also be familiar with the term Orion if you're a SolarWinds customer. The Orion platform is now just generally referred to as the SolarWinds platform and falls under the HCO product. So in here, you can basically see all of the modules that previously would have been Orion modules are now hybrid cloud observability modules. And with HCO Advanced, you get almost everything that was previously included under the Orion platform that you would have had to have purchased separately. It would have been individual licenses that you would have sort of purchased a la carte. With HCO, you get basically all that functionality with one license, and that license is node-based. So basically however many computers, routers, switches that you need to monitor with it, you would get a license for just that number of devices and don't have to worry about any of the other functionality. It's all covered under one license. And this has the ability to monitor network devices for performance, bandwidth utilization. It can look at hardware health. So if we come over here to the NPM summary, some of you may be familiar with it, some of you might not. You'll see things like hardware health overviews, see errors and discards coming across different interfaces, VLAN information, VRFs. If you have stacked switches, you'll also see switch stack information here. It also has a tool called NetPath, which allows you to track the route that data is taking across your network from one endpoint to the next. And it also has a performance analysis tool, which lets you take performance metrics from different devices or applications and chart them together. So you can look for anomalous performance between devices that should ostensibly be doing the same thing or be functioning very similarly. In addition to that, it does have its own log viewing tool, which is really meant more for doing reactions to specific events rather than looking for patterns of behavior like the Security Event Manager does. It has the ability to monitor applications and its application monitoring functions. Basically let it look at the different components of applications. So applications may have services, they may have processes, they may have file paths that are associated with them, specific Windows events that are associated with those applications. If there's metrics that you need to pull from, say, the Windows Performance Monitor for those applications, it can do that as well. It has the ability to automatically track application dependencies. So if you have a application server that also relies on a SQL server on the back end, it can map that dependency automatically and let you know if an application going down is because there's a problem on the application server, or if it's because the database server is having a problem. It has additional functionality to monitor databases specifically. It can also interface with the database performance analyzer if you want to get deeper down into the database side of things. It also has a user device tracker, which the purpose of the user device tracker is basically to help you track what is plugged in to every port in your network. And you can integrate it with Active Directory to get another level of granularity there and see not just what's plugged into the network, but see who is logged into those devices that are plugged into your network.
I'll pause you there again, Phillip, for just a second. And we're going to wrap up on this HCO portion so we can get to the Q&A. But I do want to highlight Device Tracker. Again, in my experience, working both in commercial high secure environments as well as DoD and federal agencies, high secure environments, again, because of that sort of previous mindset where we didn't necessarily worry about patching and monitoring and updating firmware inside an air-gapped network because it's air-gapped, right? We're talking about the reality we face now that has to change. And alongside that, we may or may not have existing tools in those environments. And they're not always as large as our non-air-gapped networks. Certainly some of them are. I've seen some really, really large, complex, high secure air-gapped environments in my day. But a lot of them are more moderate in size. And that in itself oftentimes demands a more moderate price point to be able to come in sort of after the fact, so to speak, and say, okay, now it's time to apply a higher standard to this environment. So we're going to deploy the data diode. We're going to deploy security tools like SEM. And we really need just a more foundational tool to know what we have in that environment and how we're managing that environment. And that's where I think HCO can really shine, and including this device tracker. Device tracker in a big commercial environment is sort of just letting you know who lives where and how they're accessing the environment. But if we take a look at device tracker in a smaller, more easily managed, I might say, environment, you can use device tracker to actually whitelist all of your endpoints by MAC address. And then from that whitelist, the moment something that's not on that whitelist gets added to the environment, you can have immediate visibility to say something has changed, something's been added, there's a new MAC in the environment that wasn't there before. And to me, in an air-gapped environment, that's a really critical piece of functionality. I just want to highlight that briefly before we wrap up on HCO. So we've got, I think, about 10 minutes left here. I think we're ready to move into our Q&A. So,
and actually before that, Bill, I'd like to just piggyback off of what you were saying about the whitelist. User device tracker, in addition to the whitelist, also has a watch list function. So for example, if you detect a MAC address that is not supposed to be there, but when you go to look for it, it is gone, you can add that same MAC address to the watch list so it can alert you if it sees that same device pop back up at some point.
Yeah, great point there. Thank you. All right. So I would hope that folks have questions on the data diode side of this as much as anything. I'm imagining that for many of you, the data diode might be the newest aspect of what we're talking about here, something perhaps that you're less familiar with. So we'll go ahead and open up the Q&A here and see what questions folks have.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for your wonderful slide deck and incredible demo. As Bill said, we are opening up our Q&A, so if you have any questions, please use the Q&A pod at the bottom of your screen. And it looks like we have our first question. Is there an option to access a free trial of SolarWinds SEM for air-gapped networks? And if so, how can we get started?
Yeah, absolutely. SolarWinds does a really great job of making all of their solutions available on various free trials. Most of them are 30 days. Some of them might be a little shorter. But certainly reach out to us here at Loop One, or reach out to a reseller through Carahsoft. And here at Loop One, or your normal SolarWinds reseller, they can absolutely help you get set up with a a free trial on any of the SolarWinds solutions.
Amazing, thank you. And then let's see, is there a functionality or feature in the SolarWinds SEM that can ingest reports from the data diode? Example, SEM to report to data diode, SFTP to SolarWinds SEM platform dashboard off the air gap network.
Yeah, so more or less what we demonstrated earlier in the presentation, the SEM solution is going to live inside the secure network. It's going to allow you to proactively manage the environment, make sure we're getting all of that vulnerability and threat awareness from inside the network, and then transmitting that through the data diode to a stakeholder in either a CSV or a PDF format, or potentially other formats if we have HCO sitting there. And so I wouldn't necessarily expect it to go from SEM via the diode to SEM, but you can certainly leverage the method that we talked about there. I don't know, Phillip, do you want to add anything to that?
Just kind of rereading the question in my head. If the question is seeing if there's a way to get like a SolarWinds SIM dashboard off the air gap network itself, not really, at least not.
It's not a native function to go SEM to report back to SEM. It's certainly something we could sit down and explore kind of what your need is there and look for ways to incorporate the data into a dashboard off network, outside of the air gap network. Really great question though. There's a question here about understanding the transfer of data, and the question is whether or not there's anything to control, how the authorization for that data movement takes place. So Colin, do you want to talk a little bit about how your Fend appliance manages what lands and what gets moved out?
Well, absolutely. So, within our devices, which are really an all-in-one design that have processors on either end, and you can have that conversation with the data source, and you can actually translate that from one format to another. So you might have SFTP on one side, talking to SolarWinds SEM. You might have a receiving end that might, for some reason, need it to be FTPS or FTP standard. It can do that translation in progress or in the middle of that process there. But in terms of, what can you do to make sure only the information that you want to send is what gets sent? There's a couple of things within that question. One is, can you control what's being sent and from where? And you can absolutely set up the diode such that you're pointing at a specific IP address. You can have specific credentials for logging into an FTP transaction, for example, or you can have specific folders you're pointing it at. There's the ability to set it up to have that individual conversation, for example, with SolarWinds SEM. So you're controlling that flow. Something else is not going to break into that transaction, can't then go and say, hey, I want to send data through. It's not able to do that. It's really continuously pointing to where you wanted to point it at. Outside of the combination with SolarWinds SEM, if you're using this to send data really of any kind, you have those same options. Say, I want this specifically from one place or from one IP address to send it to this other location, whether it's another IP address or some cloud-based file destination, you can do that as well. One thing that you could also do is if you're worried, if you're talking about doing this with classified information, there are some other tools you may need to employ, like a data guard, that you can hook up and use this as that physical barrier. The diode itself is not going to be scanning the contents of your files, which really works quite well for OT and other file transfers. We're sending that as we get it. But if you do have a specific need to be transferring classified information, reach out to us afterwards for some solutions.
Sorry. So Colin, the next question came in asking, what are the protocols that the diode supports?
So there's a big and growing list we keep available on our website, and certainly reach out to the Carahsoft team and you can get the full list there. But it's a mix of IT and OT protocols. And what we've done is with each purchase of the diode, you get all the supported protocols that come with it. So on the OT side, we're talking about Modbus, whether it's serial or Ethernet, and the ability to translate from one to another, or to translate from like Modbus TCP to JSON or MQTT. You can do those translations for that time series data. We can also handle BACnet, LAN, and some other information formats on the industrial side. But also on the IT side, we're able to do UDP for that stream of information, but also protocols that require a handshake, such as TCP or FTP or SFTP. The ability to send that and translate from one format to another is what we can do as well. We continue to grow that list, but generally we found that if somebody can get that data into TCP, FTP for flat files, or Modbus, you're covering most of the IT and OT world right there.
Yeah, I think it is important to clarify, right? When we talk about having a protocol like TCP or a TCP-based protocol in this chain, we're really talking about from the external side of the diode to the stakeholders system, right? Under no circumstance are we saying we're going to establish a TCP session across the diode. Is that right?
That's right. You're never reaching back across. You can have a handshake on the input side of the diode with that first processor. So you can say, hey, give me the next one, make sure you get it. It's then beaming it to the output side. So you have that one-way transfer using light. And then you're establishing a new handshake with that destination. So you're able to satisfy those protocols that are inherently two-way, like TCP, but you've got that one-way broadcast in the middle. There's never a reaching back across the diode.
Terrific. Thanks for that clarification. All right, we're just about the top of the hour here. I think it's time to wrap things up. Thanks very much for those great questions. So as we look at wrapping things up here, just a few takeaway steps, right? Actions that you want to be taking as you get back to your desk, as you look at how you might go forward with the information we've shared today. So certainly you can reach out to us here at Loop One if you have more questions on the SolarWinds side. And Colin, we want to run through your call to action there.
Well, absolutely. If you have a need to get data out of whether IT or OT systems and you want to maintain that air gap, keep the Fend team in mind. You can reach us on our website or via the Carahsoft team. And in particular, reach out if you are looking for this combined solution to help make sure that not only are you compliant within the time frame needed for these federal mandates, but also you go beyond compliance to actual prevention of those attacks in the first place using this combined solution. So I want to thank everybody again today for your time and hand it back over to Megan.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for answering those questions for us. I'd like to thank our participants as well as Colin Dunn, Bill Fitzpatrick, and Phillip Everett for being with us today. We hope the information you received during this webinar has been helpful.